that people want to live like people in the West, where you own a car, you've got a house with electricity. I mean, as opposed to either walking or using a donkey cart to, places, which was, the traditional way of living, and which was eco-friendly. And, living in a house with electricity, then you have all the electrical gadgets, as opposed to using, with the basics like, hand washing and all that. But then, because if you don't live that style, you are backward. Therefore, people, go for that. And then, on the other hand, we've got a group of people interested in maintaining their traditional indigenous living, which is the same people. They don't want to be moved from where they are to, where, civilization or development is. They want to maintain their their hunting, gathering, yet the government is opposed to that. Therefore, when you come in and start introducing the subject of the environment, people then look at you as you want to take us backward when you want to move forward. And then it becomes a very difficult subject to, to be introduced, to say to people. Now, the environment is in danger because of the practices, or practices from the West, if I may say that. And, it would be interesting to, see how we move forward to go back to Africa and help the Africans to go back to the basics. Because, going back to the basics would save the environment a lot. I was, I was interested when I saw the statistics that in Africa, the emissions are just that little. And when you look at it, the indigenous people don't contribute to that.
As a medic by background, I have a bit more hope for the technological potential of dealing with some of the problems which we didn't cover, which I do think has to be raised. And I think how we approach, as socialists, trying to move technologies forward in a way that is going to be of benefit not to big business but to the working class. I think this idea of whether you're in favour of more production or less production, I think is not the way to pose the question. I think you have to go back a little bit to basics. As socialists, we are in favour of production for need, to meet need. Production now does not meet need. One, because of unequal distribution, which is inherent in capitalism, and therefore all of this is very useful propaganda, why capitalism is stupid and all that, which should be obvious to anybody, but we start to have an argument because unfortunately it's not. But that inequality is also reinforced by production for a consumerism based on an individualist sort of approach to society, which actually makes everything worse. That's damaging. That story about all these products having to be binned and put into a big landfill site because they weren't produced properly according to capitalism's rules, even though some people might need them. That kind of approach to consumption, where this ever more consumption is seen as the goal. I don't think we should be in favour of that form of productionism, but we're in favour of producing the necessities of life and challenging the unequal distribution. That I think we have to be absolutely in favour of. But where it leads into sort of programme and economic programme, I think when you talk about rationing and the last point, rationing, whether it's at a company, country or individual level, the question is not simply what is the rationing, it's how is it done. If you go back to old-fashioned Trotskyism, which isn't often discussed these days, and I think does seem to be a bit of a clash between eco-green traditionally and the far left traditionally. What Trotskyism got to add here, I think, is the notion of transitional demands, wherein your demands, you're linking immediate needs. So if you do put in carbon rationing at an individual company level, you link that to workers' organisations. Say, right, we will control, we mobilise from the bottom up to control how that rationing is applied. And that rationing does mean, you don't go for your holidays here every time. You don't have these people with massive wealth and massive expenditure and wasteful production, at the level of companies, you know, workers deciding, right, we've got this, we don't want to stop production if we're producing things for people that need them, but we're going to actually control how much energy is wasted by putting the heating on and putting the air conditioning at the same time. But actually really integrating workers' control into that. And I think that's where we can link in with development in China, in Africa, etc. We have to get on board with that, but make it very much from a point of view of developing. You know, I've got no great answers. Transitional demands that actually link immediate needs with these requirements of, you know, planetary control and checking, which I think rationing may be one of the ways that we can bring those two things together.
My perspective on climate tends to come from living in the Arctic. I've spent many months living with the Inuit. I was quite interested to hear this lady talk, and also the gentleman over there, because the Inuit as a race of people are, I would imagine, I have never been to Africa, but they are an gentleman over there, because the Inuit as a race of people are, I would imagine, I have never been to Africa, but because the Inuit as a race of people are, I would imagine, I have never been to Africa, but they are an indigenous people of, as you know, Arctic Canada, Greenland and so on, and Siberia, and they are really feeling the implications of climate change at the moment in a way that we cannot even begin to think about. A lot of my work is in southern England, and I deal with people that earn £20 million a year as their basic wage. And they would, if their houses were crumbling, as houses in Alaska are doing at the moment, the permafrost is melting, the houses are falling apart around them. If that was happening in Sevenoaks in Kent, believe me, people have something to say about it. A couple of points that occurred to me. This is new to me, and I'm very interested to hear you talking. Although I can appreciate the gentleman over there saying how important all these other issues are, poverty and so on, from what I've seen in the Arctic, they will pale into insignificance with the ongoing problems that are just about to happen. If the Greenland ice cap melts, and it is doing so now, it's beginning to melt now, we are in serious trouble, and we're not talking hundreds of years, we're talking 10 years if that melts and changes the Gulf Stream as it's predicted to do. A few comments I'll throw in for you to think about. I was listening to an economist talking on the radio recently, and he was saying, well, I think maybe one solution might be to let all the worst happen, and let's see if it's cheaper then to sort the problem out. This is a guy that's in charge of the country, as it were. There was another guy talking, and he was saying, well, the problem with green tax incentives is that really, as people shift over to more environmentally friendly ways of doing things, the revenue gets lots less money, so it's not actually a great idea. And these things, I think, are extremely worrying. Now, what I'm leading up to here is that this idea of rationing is something that we are thinking about because we are so used to sort of taking or buying things. If you remember the water shortage in 1976, as I do, there were standpipes in the street. Water, at first people were queuing up, they were filling their baths, and they were trying to get more and more and more of it because they thought it was going to run out. And then, in fact, when it didn't run out, they actually began to slowly go up and collect only what they needed. So I think ultimately rationing may be an immediate solution, but ultimately I think people will take what they need. And I've seen this with the Inuit. The Inuit is a race of people, and I've lived, as I say, I've lived with them for months on end out on the ice and dog sledging. They will only take what they need from an animal, and part of their culture has always been, for thousands of years, to catch an animal, be it a seal or a walrus or whatever it is, and they take it back and they divide it between their people and their village. They don't hoard it to themselves, stuff themselves so they can't eat anymore. They just don't do that. But we've been kind of conditioned to think like that, and I think if we can persuade people to not view life as something that we have to have more of, or something we have to have more, then I think we'll go a long way to sorting things out. One last point, I don't understand as what the your movement is. I'd be interested in how you view money. I'm not sure whether you envisage staying. Sorry if that sounds totally ignorant, but I mean,
said, but I think it's quite interesting because what you said about Inuit and lifestyles and things like that, and what you said about Sand people. There's similarities there because, as far as I can understand, what changes is like what the people actually do at home. But what doesn't change is how people make a living, or how do people subsist, right? So for instance, the people there will now live in wooden houses. They've probably got access to electricity, maybe through wind power or something. They've probably got televisions and stuff like that. But they still subsist through hunting, for instance. And I think the same things may well apply in Africa. Obviously, there's difference if you have to range over a large area. So I don't think having electricity is incompatible with continuing your present way of life. The electricity might be solar powered rather than grid. I think it should be, right, in that context. And I think there's tremendous potential for that. So there's actually a lot of potential for having a more comfortable living situation. But if you like, making your living in the same kind of way. I didn't understand what the comrade was saying about China, I have to say. Right, all these dormitories, all this productivism that you so forth is precisely what puts the people in their dormitories, right, and gives them the disgusting living conditions they have, producing all the goods that they have. For us, right, if you want to see what's happened to Britain's carbon emissions, they've gone to China, right? Yeah, because the manufacturing industry in this country has gone down there, right? And manufacturing has gone to China. China's emissions have gone up, right? So we actually own some of those emissions, which is never considered when you have all these quotas and rationing and so forth. And lastly, when we're discussing quotas and rationing, a lot of these things are actually already happening. In this country, there's the climate change levy, which is a tax on companies. Companies do have quotas. They trade in carbon, actually having no effect on emissions in the country. You recognise also that the production of goods is not the main source of carbon emissions. It's actually the use of goods that is the main source, and heating and heat electricity use in buildings that is the main source of carbon emissions. And these are things that need to be looked at.
It creates, in the developing world, cities of slums. It creates Lagos, it creates Mexico cities, it creates all these cities. Okay, quite a few people have cars, but it's hell. And if people all over Africa, if that's their image of what they want hell. And and the only way forward for the developing countries is sustainable development. Sustainable development, which actually starts from the beginning with proper transport systems, with proper methods of producing electricity, all these other things. But that can only be done if if the whole of imperialism is broken, because imperialism controls and dominates these countries and forces through the model of protectionism that was developed in Europe and the United States, which is what we have to stop if we're going to solve the crisis. And I think carbon capping or quotas, except rationing, is absolutely the way forward, as opposed to forms of taxation, even progressive taxation. I would support certain progressive taxation. If the London charges, the London congestion charges, were deeply progressive, i.e. BMW drivers pay £500 every time they have to drive into the city, whereas a small 1 litre car that was running on biofuels had no payment. I think that would be fine. I'd vote for that. But what you've got is a flat tax, and what you have is during the day in London, Lexus, BMW, Mercedes, and white vans driving about, and at 6:30, long queues at the Elephant Castle of ordinary people waiting for the thing to end so they can drive into the city. That's what happens. It's obviously a tax to the poor, and so therefore, if you're going to create demands that mobilises people, and that is the only way that it has to be egalitarian.
Okay,
and egalitarianism means quotas. That is the only way to organise it.
George.